Hello, good to be with you again. I'm Paul Scheele, and today we're talking about the idea of reviewing what it is you've learned in order to help build an ongoing scaffold of greater competence, greater knowledge, greater skill. Scaffolding is an interesting idea. There was a woman named Rita Schmilkstein who wrote a book called Natural Learning, in which she talked about any particular idea that we want to learn in a classroom setting is best done in a series of 6 stages. And what we want to do is we want to get a little lesson and try something out, and then think afterwards what it is that you learned. And then dialogue in small groups about what it is you learned, and then the large group, what it is that you learned. And what happens is each time you're getting a little bit more information at that stage. And then you go into the next level of the same unit of information, next level and next level. And as you're up leveling your ability for both the knowledge as well as the skill acquisition, you're building these necessary neurological connections, or you're scaffolding to higher and higher levels of learning. So that brings up the idea of once you've learned something, reviewing it is going to be one of the best ways to actually build these stronger neurological connections, or as I talk about in the Memory Optimizer course, the idea of building neural highways into the information that you're choosing to acquire. And one of the things that I noticed when I was going to university is that I would mind map my notes. If you've learned mind mapping, it's powerful technique. Rather than taking linear notes, you do it in more of a radiant thinking from a center outward like this. And what will happen is during a normal lecture, the professor might get into some additional information. I'd put see page 2, and then in the middle of my next sheet, I would start writing what he or she was talking about there, and then go back to the main mind map and continue. And so by the end of a lecture, I might have 5 or 6 pages of mind maps. Before getting up and leaving, I would take all of those 5 or 6 pages and consolidate them into a single mind map. What does that give me? Gives me one of the best things that educators will tell you you can possibly do. The best time to review new information is immediately after having just learned it. Now, the ideal thing to do is also the next day, review it again. Then 3 days later, review it again. And then a week later, and each week for a month, review it again. And what's happening is every time you go back, you're reconstructing the original construction. And as a result of that, building these neural highways to the immediate recall of what it is that you've deemed important to you to learn. One of the examples I give is when traveling in Mexico, I was with my host. We were walking in a park, and a little lizard ran by. I said, "How do you say that in Spanish, the name of that creature, the lizard? ¿Cómo se dice?" And my host said, "La lagartija." Now, lizard and lagartija, I couldn't make any connections at all to those two. So essentially, my neural net, my existing neural circuitry didn't have a way to hold this new name, and so passes right through. So I have to build a temporary thread by creating an image that I could easily call up and recall later on. So I thought lagar tea ha. All right, I know what a lagar is. It's a type of a beer. And tea, a teacup. and ha is laughing. So I imagined a lizard wearing a skirt. So it's la, feminine. La, lagar, tiha is she's pouring a lagar beer into a teacup. It's spilling all over, running over the table, and she's laughing about it. La, lagar, tiha. Now, the next day, I see a lizard. I'm thinking, okay, what was it that I imagined? She was wearing a skirt and laughing because, she was pouring beer, lagar, into a teacup, lagar tiha. So now I've reconstructed the original construction. I've reinforced, I've reviewed, but I've reinforced that neural connection. I built more neurology into that temporary thread that I tied in to my pre-existing neural network. A couple of days later, I reviewed it again, and pretty soon I didn't have to think about the lizard pouring a lagar beer. I immediately said, that's lagar tiha. Got it. It's built in. I know it. Now, this happens because you've reviewed it. You're reconstructing an original construction. And what that does is it builds neurology. When you learn something, it's not written on a hard drive somewhere in your brain that you pick up. No, it's distributed all over your brain, and you have to bring it back. So reviewing is an absolutely essential way to consolidate and build the learning into you that is important to you, whether it's knowledge, whether it's an attitude, a behavioral response, or whether it's a skill. Reviewing is going to be essential. When it's a behavioral skill, you want to review the movement, the way in which you do a particular task. So I'm learning a particular song on my guitar. I'm watching a YouTube video, and the person said, okay, do you see this? These three things. Now you got to practice that part until you get it right. So what I did is, after learning it, later that night, picked up the guitar and saw if I could do it again. The next day, I had a sense of it, but I rewatched just that early segment, reinforced it, practiced it again later that day. The next day, without the YouTube, did it on my own, heard it, practiced it, tried it, play with it. And after a couple of days, was able to get it. The transition of my fingers from this position to that position, I wasn't used to doing that. And so I'm building neurology as I go. That is how we develop new skills. It's in the review and the reconstruction of the original construction. So enjoy learning. It is what the brain does best. It's what you do naturally. You are a naturally gifted learner. Use those gifts to the best of your ability by following the various ideas that we have here on this series of videos for you. And keep in mind, there's genius in you, and you can learn anything that you sincerely set your mind upon. That's all for now. Peace and blessings. Hope to see you again soon.